You're listening to Creating Great Grooming Dogs. I'm Chrissy Newmeyer-Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, a certified behavior consultant for canines, and a certified professional dog trainer. And this, my friends and colleagues, is the podcast where grooming and training meet. Today I want to get into some training methods, but before I do that, I want to talk about the fact that there are many ways to teach a dog. There are a lot of opinions out there. I'm going to ask all of you to be open-minded and kind to each other. Sometimes discussions about different methods turn into internet warfare, and I don't want that for any of us. I know what my own biases are, and I know that it can be hard to listen to something different with an open mind, but it is really important. I'm going to share information that's been successful for my own customers and for their dogs. I'm a crossover trainer, so I started working with dogs in '86, and I've definitely changed the way I do things. I don't think I even do things the same way as I did last year because I'm always taking more information in. I'm going to continuing ed. I'm always learning. And that does mean kind of replacing something you were doing with a new tool. But I want you to be open-minded. I understand that it can be hard. I ask you to give it some serious thought. Ask questions, give suggestions, be willing to try something new. And listening to the ways that I explain why and what I'm doing may actually give you some ideas on how to explain these things to your own customers, maybe some coworkers or an employer. Addressing each other with kindness and respect will encourage learning. And if we only learn from people that we agree with, we won't learn much at all. I actually listen to an awful lot of stuff from people that use methods I don't use. And some of my best friends use methods I don't use. So I want you to be open-minded while I give you some brief overview of training today. I know that we often think in terms of a quick recipe for fixing a problem. What do I do if a dog is bad for his ears? What do I do if a dog hates having his nails trimmed? But I'm going to tell you that that's not the best way of looking at things, and we're going to talk some training stuff. So every dog is different, and behavior is an individual's response to something that's going on. And because every dog is different, we need to be thinking about why they're doing it and understand the concepts of behavior change. To ask a dog to stop doing something isn't a goal. I know we kind of think about it that way. I used to too. It's pretty common for us to think, I just want him to stop wiggling when I do this. I want him to stop being, aggressive toward me about nails, or I want him to stop screaming when he's in the tub. But stop doing isn't a goal. If we're trying to stop a behavior, we are setting ourselves up for this long battle, and what it turns into is just putting out fires, right? You have to wait for the behavior to happen before you can stop it, right? So it's sort of like, okay, when he does this, how do I react? And I don't want you to get into reactive training. That's not our goal. In fact, I hear it an awful lot when people tell me that, well, I've got a couple of dogs that are only, I can only groom them. Nobody else can. They're only good for me. And I've got to say that that's great that you got to that point, but your training isn't yet complete because we need the dog to be able to understand that that the grooming is safe and have it transfer to other people also. And that's where I immediately start thinking, does the dog know it's safe, or has the dog learned that you better not bite me, or I always win, or something else that we kind of don't want? That's a lot of baggage. I don't want you to have baggage. I don't want the dogs to have baggage. I don't want there to be all sorts of contingencies. It should be you are calm and comfortable and cooperative, and because of that, I can do my job, or the vet can do their job, or the owner can do their job. I actually have a lot of trouble getting video of naughty dogs being better. And I've tried because I'm like, how am I supposed to sell this to anybody if I can't get good video of a before and after? But I don't want to do one more just for science, right? Like one more dog freak out. But what I do is I start off with calm. In a previous podcast, we talked about 3 steps of calm, but I start them off with calm. I continue to nudge into their comfort zone and help them be a little bit more comfortable with it. I end on calm, so it's start with calm, maintain calm, end with calm. And what happens is I don't get any really fantastic video. I don't get big dramatic befores and afters. But let me tell you why that works. All right. I want you to be thinking about not only is every dog different, but the core behavior that we're looking for is a dog who is good for grooming. And what that really entails is a dog who can be touched all over, be repositioned, can stand, can sit, can have a leg lifted up, can maybe have their front legs lifted up while we do something on their belly, right? They need to be repositioned. They need to be able to be picked up, moved from a table to a bathtub, into a crate. We need to be able to touch them with objects. And those can be clippers, those can be scissors, those could be the dryer, because, think you're still being touched. The dryer's still touching you. We need them to be comfortable with the variety of sounds. And so when we think about those things as skills that we can now build on, so then we're thinking, all right, well, how do I build a skill of whatever, whatever it is we need to do. Let's start off with an example of, okay, the skill of standing. How can I build that skill? Well, I can reward it. I can reward it. So you'll hear things like positive reinforcement. And I'll talk about the quadrants in a second, but I tend to be a positive reinforcement trainer, which means it doesn't mean that you only use positive reinforcement all the time and that means cookies. What that means is that I choose to find the behavior I want and encourage it. And by doing that, I build that behavior's frequency. So I know I get a little techie and I'm not trying to, but for some of you, you need the tech and some of you just need the concepts, because this is for trainers and for groomers. But when I build those concepts, when I say, all right, I need you to be more comfortable with standing, then I can build that in a way where the dog is comfortable with standing and we can add things after that. Because a dog that's comfortable with standing doesn't necessarily transfer immediately to I'm comfortable with standing and having clippers on me, right? So we need to have that part be functional for us. We need that dog to be able to understand how to do it. And we can build that instead of stop sitting or stop struggling or stop, trying to knock the clippers out of my hand with your foot. We can build stand and be still. And by building a new skill, we're saving a whole lot of time, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel for every little skill. We just need to help them understand some of these bigger concepts. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the four quadrants. You guys might have heard of this. If you're groomers, you might not have. But the idea is it's a loose guideline. It's hotly debated. We could certainly go on for days. Entire weekend seminars are devoted to this, so we're not going to get into too much depth. But it's kind of a guideline. You can increase a behavior, and that's what we call reinforcement. When a behavior increases, or the likelihood of that behavior increases, the frequency of that behavior increases, that's reinforcement. If we're trying to decrease a behavior, that is punishment. And it doesn't have emotion wrapped in it. I think that sometimes we start thinking reinforcement is all like, oh, hey, we're giving them cookies. But sometimes a cookie is just a cookie. If it does not increase the behavior, it was not a reinforcer. It was just a cookie. So punishments don't necessarily mean that you are angry. This is a scientific version of punishment. The behavior was reduced. So punishment means that the behavior was reduced. If you yell at a dog or tell him no, and the behavior is not reduced, the behavior was not punished from a scientific point of view. It was just you simply got angry. So sometimes, a cookie is just a cookie, and sometimes a yell is just angry, and they have no effect on the behavior we're looking at. It's important to have something in mind of what we're looking at. So again, we're talking about teaching him to stand still, right? So if he's standing up and I've got my hands on him, I can encourage that in two ways. So reinforcement, I talked about reinforcement and punishment, but reinforcement, there are two ways to reinforce. There's positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And what positive reinforcement is when something is added to increase the likelihood of the behavior happening again. Negative reinforcement is when something is removed to help that behavior happen again. All right, so it gets a little tricky because it's more of an algebraic kind of positive and negative, not an emotional, something good, something bad. I don't want you to think about it in terms of good, bad, pleasant, unpleasant, because sometimes those things just muddy up the waters. This is getting into more of the science of it, okay? But positive reinforcement for a dog who happens to be standing and is being really good could be petting. It could be a cookie. It could be whatever that the dog enjoys or likes. And that would be, oh, the likelihood has increased. Now, we won't know if the likelihood increases until we try it again. We got to keep trying it. We got to keep working. That's where we get some repetitions in. Because otherwise, it could just be that he got a cookie and he has no idea why. And that's where we get into reward markers and stuff that's not going to get covered today. But when we start talking about having the ability to encourage the thing that we want. Now, negative reinforcement, again, isn't an emotional thing. It's about removing something to increase the behavior you want. It's hard to come up with a good example for standing, but I will use an example for negative reinforcement, which is if a dog is barking for attention, and as you walk closer, barks at you for attention, if you turn your back, you are removing your attention to increase the likelihood that he'll be quiet, right? It gets a little bit tricky, but if we're trying to encourage him to be quiet, we might remove our attention. And like I said, these get tricky. Entire weekend seminars cover this stuff. God knows how many books, right? So I try not to use negative reinforcement all that much, but I will say there are times where I do use it. So if I were holding a dog and I'm working on teaching him to be standing and to be still, I might, if he starts to wiggle, calm him down again and then let him off the hook, right? Like, okay, you can go play. And that would be removing the task, right? I know it gets a little bit confusing, but that would be, okay, now your task is done. Not that it was particularly unpleasant, but it might just be that he's a little bit tired, right? So I'm going to remove the task as a reward for being calm, because sometimes they remain calm if they think, oh, is she going to let me off the hook if I'm just quiet? All right. I know it's tricky, and we'll talk more about it. So anyway, punishment. Punishment, we talked about, is when something is reduced. It is less likely to happen. And what that means is there are two ways to do that. We can add something to make something less likely to happen, or we can remove something to make it less likely to happen. I personally don't use punishment a whole lot. I wouldn't say that I would never ever use it, just that I can't remember the last time I did. But to add something to a dog, to a dog's behavior to decrease it, are things like saying no if they've been taught that that means to end what they're doing, getting mad at them, or a leash correction. Leash corrections are a pretty common one. There's not a whole lot of good uses for punishment in the grooming room because what we're seeing are stress behaviors. And it's really hard to tell a dog, knock it off, I don't want that, when they're stressed out, right? It's better to replace it with, hey, this is the thing we do want. This is the thing we do want. I'm all about setting them up for success. So with punishment, like I said, it's adding or subtracting from what they're doing to decrease. So positive punishment doesn't sound, it might sound friendly, but it's not. It means that we're adding something to make that less likely. And that might be, well, these are things that I don't use, but it might be like squirting a squirt bottle at a dog who's barking. Which, by the way, I worked at one grooming shop and they would squirt at dogs that were barking. And I have never worked anywhere with so many cage aggressive dogs. I've got to say they had such a high number of dogs who were cage aggressive in their grooming shop. So it's not about if it reduces the behavior. I'm sorry, it is about if it reduces the behavior. It's not about just getting angry, okay? Because they weren't getting angry when they were squirting the water, but they also weren't getting any effect from it. The dogs were still barking. So it was just turning into something that created a new problem, which is, I don't want you near my cage because you might come over with a water bottle. All right. Negative punishment is actually a little bit kinder than positive punishment. Like I said, it's weird. So negative punishment means you're removing something. So you're removing something to get the dog to be less likely to do it again. So it might be you were walking up with a cookie, and at the last minute the dog did something you don't like, and you're like, never mind, you don't get the cookie, right? Like, too bad, you don't get the cookie. I removed that. Or nope, you can't get out of the crate now. You were doing really well, but I was gonna let you play, but the last minute you did something goofy, and I don't like it, so I'm gonna stop. Right? It's actually a little bit kinder than positive punishment, because positive and negative, when we're talking about the four quadrants, means adding and subtracting. And punishment and reinforcement mean decreasing and increasing behaviors. All right, so I know that's a big jumble, a whole lot of stuff to unpack. It's hard to just briefly discuss it. But when I'm thinking about adding a behavior that I do want, that becomes clearer for the dog. I'm going to give you a human example, and I hope that this makes sense to you. This is the human example I give a lot of my training customers, so it should make sense. Imagine you're at a new job, and you are just being told, okay, you have to pick up the phone. All right, so you pick up the phone rings, you pick up the phone, Joe Schmo's Pizza, how can I help you? And the person there training you says, no. You're like, okay. So the phone rings the next time. Maybe you don't pick up the phone. They still tell you no. Or you pick up the phone. You're like, Joe Schmo's Pizza. May I take your order? And they tell you no. And you start getting really frustrated. Like every time you pick up the phone, you try something new. You try something different. You're trying to make them happy. And they always are just telling you no. Until you say, well, too bad. I'm just going to do it the way I want to. Because there's a point where in that job scenario, you would be saying, no, I need to know what exactly you want from me. Tell me how to pick up the phone. Tell me how to take an order. Tell me what you want me to do. And that's where we're coming in with, like, that would be job training. And I think it should be our dog training too. I want them to know exactly what to do. So now imagine you're at that same job, and the worker who's teaching you says, okay, we pick up the phone by saying this. Hello, Joe Schmo's Pizza. Let me take your order. Or we have specials today, right? And then they have you practice it before you actually have to pick up the phone. And then they're there beside you when you do pick up the phone to tell you you did it right, or to tell you how to tweak it, to tell you how to be better at it. Which job are you going to stay at? I know that the job where I'm constantly being told no, I'd probably leave. Well, probably right away. I don't think I'd stay the shift. But the job where someone's telling me exactly what they want from me and guiding me along, setting me up to get it right, giving me instruction, is the job that I would stay at. So that is why I'm always trying to build the behavior that I do want instead of putting out fires. The idea of telling somebody no, I understand where it comes from. We want them to stop what they're doing. And God knows it sputters out of my mouth once in a while with my own guys, hey, no. And then I catch myself and go, all right, I might have temporarily stopped what was going on, but I haven't taught him what I want him to do. And I need to teach him exactly what I want him to do, set him up to get it right. And if that behavior is not increasing in frequency, if that behavior is not happening more often for me, if that's not getting better, I need to backtrack and say, how can I make that clearer to the animal? And that's part of training. So I know there's a lot covered, and it's only a short podcast, so we will cover more. But I want you to give that some thought, mull that over, ask me questions, because I want you to understand that there is some science behind it. It's not that I'm against punishment. It's that I am totally more interested in setting up exactly what I want from my customers, from my dogs, and usually I refer to the dogs as my customers too, which my sister thinks is kind of adorable. I talk about like my customer Sparky, but I want them to know exactly what I want from them and encourage them toward that, instead of worrying about what do I do if he is bad, because then you're just putting out fires. I could answer that pizza phone, that pizza job phone, a million different ways before I ever caught on to the one that works. And if they aren't there to tell me the one that works, I might just think that they forgot to say no. So it's a lot to unpack. Give it some thought. I know I got early kind of techie, but have fun with it. I'm going to add a little podcast disclaimer. Yes, I'm a behavior consultant, trainer, and groomer, but this podcast does not take the place of consultations and lessons. The information here is meant to be educational and helpful. This field is ever changing and newer information comes out. Older podcasts may become outdated. I am not responsible for how you may use this information. For real individualized help, you can get a lesson or a consultation with me by emailing me at chrissy@happycritters.net or finding me at the Creating Great Grooming Dogs Facebook page. I am happy to work with people on their very specific goals and needs, but don't hold me responsible for things that happen on a podcast.